Our lead story this week tackles an issue that, considering its magnitude, could be a fixture on every episode of our show. It's climate change and how the media are grappling with how to cover it. Only a small percentage of news audiences would have heard about the report released earlier this month by the UN's Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, or the IPCC. And that's not because the report was dull or inconsequential. No, in fact, it's been called a landmark study, warning that the world has just 12 years left to limit global temperature rise to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Any higher, and the risks of drought, floods, and extreme weather will soar. Coverage of the IPCC report was a flash in the pan, like so much climate change reporting is. The initial wave of headlines receded as quickly as it had emerged. Climate change is the world's most significant existential challenge, and those who want to cover it are still figuring out how to convey its size and scale. The Listening Post's Meenakshi Ravi now on the coverage of the IPCC report and what it reveals about the state of climate change reporting.
It's a story as big as this planet, affecting every country, every economy, every individual. And its urgency ratchets up higher every year. And yet, climate change coverage nearly always seems to need a crutch, an event to peg it on. A global conference, a protest, or, as it was this time around, the release of the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change's special report on global warming. The report's findings were monumental.
This is the most dire report we've had from the IPCC yet. They're basically saying we need to move now. We need to take really serious action if we want to prevent the worst impacts of climate change.
The report is something of a call to arms, telling us that the survival of our species depends on a political revolution.
These are overwhelming scientific findings, and frankly, it overwhelms scientists, and it is going to overwhelm journalists as well.
The headline in the IPCC report is stark. It says rapid, far-reaching, and unprecedented changes are needed in all aspects of society if mankind is to contain the average global temperature increase to 1.5 degrees Celsius. The time frame the IPCC has set for this is just over a decade, 12 years. In the absence of a paradigm shift, a rethinking of how the world functions, the droughts, food shortages, environmental degradation, and poverty being experienced already are going to get much worse, much faster.
In some cases, I think the sort of shockingness of the report, I think, led some of the coverage to jump to a kind of, we're doomed, there's no hope.
The report warns that storm intensities, wildfires, even pest outbreaks will increase, which could...
But I worry that if all of a sudden, we have this new study and it says that making progress on climate change has to be so drastic that it's more or less impossible, then people will start to get really dismayed and lose hope. And this is always a challenge of climate coverage.
The New York Times, in their main piece covering the report, had a photo of a lone child playing in the sand with these bones. And that's been the style of coverage you generally get, which seems to indicate that they are more capable of imagining an apocalypse
Time is running out
than they are, for instance, of imagining increasing taxation on the ultra-wealthy, on corporations. That creates millions of good green jobs and regulates corporations and phases out fossil fuel production. They find it impossible to imagine a political alternative other than kind of apocalyptic scenarios.
That climate change isn't the most covered ongoing news story in the world is a reflection of just how many times the opportunity is missed. In the US alone, freak weather incidents over the past few years would have justified it being in the headlines every day. However, the link between climate change and weather incidents that are increasing in intensity and frequency is often never made. A 2017 study by the DC-based Media Matters Group into the coverage of Hurricane Harvey found that over a span of 2 crucial weeks, 2 main cable news outlets, ABC and NBC, didn't air a single segment mentioning climate change and its link to such weather events. This study isn't the only one of its kind by Media Matters. In July this year, it found that coverage of the heat wave across the United States followed a similar pattern.
We looked at reporting on the 3 big TV broadcast networks and found that those programs mentioned the heat wave 127 times, and only one of those mentioned climate change.
The media is not able to grasp this linkage. So for example, this year, if you just see Kerala floods in India, we had historically unprecedented flood. Within a period of 2 to 3 days, something like 25 to 30 trillion liters of water fell over this small state. But if you look at the media reportage in India, they were talking about local ecological disaster, local changes in ecology, cutting of forest, and those kind of things. But the linkage between climate change and Kerala floods was not there.
This is a real problem and a missed opportunity. Climate change can seem like a really distant or theoretical problem. But when there's extreme weather, that's a real opportunity for the media to talk about climate change and how it affects extreme weather and exacerbates extreme weather.
And you think, what can I do?
A fixture in much of climate change reporting is the notion that individual action can help stave off the existential threat posed by global warming.
You're changing your light bulb, you're driving a different car, maybe you're eating less meat. Whatever you're doing to help the world is rubbing off on your neighbors.
Individual awareness is vital. Media emphasis on it, however, is out of proportion. The real action needs to come from industry. In 2017, the UK-based non-profit, the CDP Group, published a report correlating specific volumes of greenhouse gas or GHG emissions with the industries responsible for them. It found that since 1988, just 100 corporations have produced more than 70% of the world's greenhouse gas emissions.
This is not just a problem of me or a problem of you. There are companies, oil companies, natural gas companies, coal companies, who are responsible for the vast amount of the pollution that is causing climate change.
Where there's progress, there's energy.
Many of them have waged disinformation campaigns. They have tried to downplay and distort the science. They have got politicians in their pockets who are discouraging or blocking climate action.
If there was a list of criminals who have polluted the climate, then ExxonMobil would come at the front. British Petroleum will come as the top climate polluters. So will companies in India, in Saudi Arabia, many countries who are polluting the climate, but also have huge influence on media in terms of their contributions to advertisement and support to media. So media is very quick to talk about what governments need to do or what people need to do, but they will rarely talk about what corporations need to do.
For instance, there was a widely panned CNN tweet. The tweet was, "Scared of the new climate report? Here's a few things you can do." And of course, all the prescriptions that it made had to do with individual consumer changes. And it completely neglected the actual structural forces and corporate power that underlies the climate crisis. And I don't think the stress on the changes that individuals can make rather than on what corporations are doing is an accident. I think it is a function of the dominant ideology of our era, namely neoliberalism, which has persuaded us, or tried to persuade us, that the market is a kind of magical entity that will solve all of our problems.
Unprecedented changes. That's what the IPCC report says is needed to deal with global warming. As media outlets covered the report, almost none of them, this network included, reported on changes they would make in their own newsrooms or to their own journalistic practices. One place it might be wise to start: stop dealing with the climate change issue as separate from every other story, every other beat.
I find it quite disorienting to read the news sometimes, because you will be going from this report that's really staggering in its implications, and then on the next page there will be an article about the potential renovation of JFK Airport that doesn't say anything about the role of flying and air travel in contributing to carbon emissions and how we might need to change that quite drastically. I think that they all are very deeply connected. I think this is particularly true for reporting on the economy and economics and job growth and all of these things that make no mention of climate change, but it is our economic model that is driving climate change, and those things have to be put together much more than they are now.